The girl stood barefoot in the middle of Main Street, her cotton dress torn at the hem, shouting words that made every window on the block snap shut. "I'm too young to be a wife." Her voice cracked over the word *wife*, and Sam Garrett felt something in his chest crack right along with it. He'd been loading fence posts onto his wagon when the commotion started. Now he stood frozen, watching as Emmett Calhoun, 50 if he was a day, belly straining against his vest buttons, tried to grab the girl's wrist. She jerked away, stumbling backward into the water trough. The splash sent muddy droplets across the dusty street. "You signed the papers, girl," Calhoun barked. His face had gone red as a branding iron. "Your pa took my money fair and square." "My pa's a drunk," the girl's voice went shrill, "and I'm *13. The number hung in the air like gunsmoke. Sam's hands tightened on the wagon rail. Around him, the people of Salvation Creek did what they always did, looked away. Mrs. Henderson pulled her daughters inside the general store. The blacksmith suddenly found something fascinating about his anvil. Even Sheriff Dodds, leaning against the jailhouse, studied his boots like they held the secrets of the universe. Sam had come to this town 6 months ago looking for nothing but work and quiet. He'd found both on a cattle ranch 10 miles north, sleeping in the bunkhouse and keeping to himself. He didn't know this girl, didn't know Calhoun beyond seeing him at the saloon, playing cards with other men who had more money than sense. But he knew the look in her eyes. He'd seen it once before, in a different girl, in a different town, and he'd walked away from that too. "Not this time. The girl doesn't want to go with you." Sam's voice came out steady, though his pulse hammered against his throat. Calhoun turned, his eyes narrowing. "This ain't your concern, ranch hand." "Maybe not." Sam stepped down from the wagon, his boots hitting the packed earth with soft thuds. "But seems to me a girl's got a right to speak her mind." "She's *bought and paid for," Calhoun spat the words. "I got a contract with her father." "You got a piece of paper signed by a man too drunk to know Tuesday from Christmas." Sam moved closer, positioning himself between Calhoun and the girl. "That don't sound much like a contract to me." The girl had gone quiet, water dripping from her elbows. Up close, Sam could see she wasn't just young, she was thin as a fence rail, with hollows under her cheekbones that spoke of too many missed meals. Her eyes were brown, wide and watchful as a cornered deer. "You calling me a cheat?" Calhoun's hand drifted toward his hip, where a revolver sat snug in its holster. Sam didn't move. "I'm saying the girl's 13 years old, and if you take her, everyone in this town's gonna remember they watched it happen." For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then Sheriff Dodds finally pushed off the jailhouse wall, his star catching the late afternoon sun. "Calhoun," the sheriff said, his voice carrying that tired edge of a man who'd broken up one too many fights. "Maybe you should come back when you've talked to a judge, get things sorted proper-like." It wasn't much, it wasn't justice, but it was enough to make Calhoun's jaw work like he was chewing something bitter. He jabbed a finger at the girl. "This ain't over, Molly Brennan. Your pa owes me, and I aim to collect." He stalked off toward the saloon, his boots kicking up little dust clouds with each angry step. The street began to breathe again, doors opened, conversations resumed. The blacksmith's hammer rang out once more. It was like watching a town remember how to be alive. Sam turned to the girl, Molly, and found her staring at him with an expression caught somewhere between gratitude and terror. "Thank you," she whispered. "Where's your pa now?" She flinched, sleeping it off in the livery. "He won't wake up till tomorrow." Sam glanced at the sun, gauging the hours left before dark. His boss expected him back at the ranch by nightfall, but looking at this girl with her dripping dress and bare feet, he couldn't just leave her standing in the street. "You got somewhere safe to go?" Molly shook her head. "Pa sold our house to pay his debts. We've been sleeping wherever we can." Of course he had. Sam felt that familiar anger kindle in his gut, the kind that made a man want to put his fist through something. Instead, he pulled off his work jacket and draped it over Molly's shoulders. It swallowed her whole. "Come on," he said. Let's get you dried off and find you some supper. The boarding house smelled like lye soap and bacon grease. Mrs. Talbot, the proprietor, took one look at Molly and ushered her upstairs for a hot bath and clean clothes without asking questions. Sam waited in the cramped parlor, his hat balanced on his knee, wondering what in God's name he thought he was doing. He was a ranch hand. He made $40 a month and slept in a room with 5 other men who snored loud enough to wake the dead. He had no business getting involved in this girl's troubles. But when Molly came back downstairs wearing a borrowed dress that actually fit, her hair combed and her face scrubbed clean, she looked so young it made his chest ache. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall. Her hands were rough with work, her nails bitten down to the quick. They sat at a corner table while Mrs. Talbot brought out plates of stew and fresh bread. Molly ate like she was afraid someone might snatch it away, barely pausing to breathe between bites. "Slow down," Sam said gently. "It ain't going anywhere." She flushed but forced herself to take smaller spoonfuls. Between bites, the story came out in fragments. Her mother had died 2 years back from fever. Her father had taken to drinking shortly after, unable to cope with the grief or the farm or the daughter who looked too much like her dead wife. The debts had piled up. When Calhoun offered money in exchange for Molly's hand, her father had seen it as salvation. "He said it was for the best," Molly said, her voice barely audible. "Said Calhoun had a nice house and I'd be taken care of. But Mr. Calhoun, she trailed off, her eyes dropping to her lap. "He what? He looks at me wrong, like I'm a thing he bought, not a person." Sam's jaw tightened. He'd known men like Calhoun. They saw women and children as property, something to own and control. The thought of this girl in that house, subject to that man's whims, made him want to ride out to Calhoun's ranch and teach him what it felt like to be powerless. But violence wouldn't solve this. It'd only make things worse. "What do you want?" Sam asked. "If you could have anything, what would it be?" Molly looked up, surprised by the question. I want to go to school. I can read some, but I want to learn more. I want to—" She hesitated, like the dream was too fragile to say aloud. "I want to be a teacher someday, help kids who don't got nobody else." Something in Sam's heart shifted. This girl, who'd been through hell and back, still had dreams bigger than her circumstances, still believed the world could be better than what she'd seen. "All right," he said, "then we'll figure out how to make that happen." "But how? Pa's got the law on his side. That contract." "Contracts can be broken, especially ones signed under duress." Sam didn't actually know if that was true, but he'd figure it out. "First thing we need to do is get you somewhere Calhoun can't reach you. Then we'll talk to a real lawyer, not just Sheriff Dodds." Molly's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Sam was quiet for a long moment, remembering another girl, another town, another chance he'd let slip away because he'd told himself it wasn't his problem. "Let's just say I owe somebody," he said finally, "and you're as good a person as any to pay that debt to." The next week passed in a blur of planning and careful maneuvering. Sam convinced Mrs. Talbot to let Molly stay at the boarding house in exchange for help with cleaning and cooking. He paid what he could from his wages, knowing it'd leave him short at the end of the month, but not caring much about that. Calhoun made his presence known. He showed up at the boarding house twice, demanding to see his future wife. Mrs. Talbot, bless her stubborn heart, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and told him to take his business elsewhere. When he threatened to involve the sheriff, she reminded him that she was second cousin to the territorial judge, and maybe he'd like to take his grievances there instead. Calhoun had left in a rage both times, but Sam knew it was only a matter of time before he made a real move. The lawyer Sam found, a young man named Patterson who'd set up practice above the saloon, looked over the contract and frowned. "It's sloppy work," Patterson said, adjusting his spectacles. "Barely legal even if everything was above board. The girl's father was in debt to Calhoun, and instead of paying cash, he signed over his daughter's future." He shook his head. "It's not slavery, not technically, but it's close enough to make my skin crawl." "Can we break it?" Sam asked. Maybe the girl's young, too young to consent to marriage in most territories. We'd need to argue that the contract is void because she wasn't a party to it. But, Patterson hesitated, that require going before a judge, and judges around here tend to side with property rights. If they see this as a debt settlement, they might uphold it. Sam felt his hope deflating. So what do we do? We'd need to prove the father signed under coercion or incompetence, get witnesses to testify he was drunk when he made the deal, maybe find evidence that Calhoun's been involved in other, unsavory transactions. It wasn't much, but it was something. Sam left the lawyer's office feeling like he'd just taken on a fight he wasn't qualified for. But when he returned to the boarding house and saw Molly helping Mrs. Talbot hang laundry, laughing at something the old woman said, he knew he couldn't back down now. Over the following days, Sam asked questions around town. Carefully, quietly, he learned that Calhoun had a reputation for lending money at terrible rates, then collecting through unconventional means. 2 other families had lost their land to him. One widow had been pressured into selling her late husband's ranch for a fraction of its worth. But nobody would testify. Fear ran deep in Salvation Creek. Calhoun had money, influence, and a mean streak a mile wide. Crossing him meant risking your livelihood, maybe your life. Sam was running out of options and time. Then, one evening, Molly's father showed up. Jack Brennan looked like a man carved from regret. His hands shook as he stood in the boarding house parlor, hat clutched to his chest. His eyes were bloodshot, but clearer than they'd been in months, Molly later said. "I want to see my daughter." Mrs. Talbot looked ready to throw him out, but Sam held up a hand. He called Molly down from upstairs. She descended slowly, her face pale, her hands gripping the banister like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Father and daughter stared at each other across the small room. The silence stretched thin as wire. "Molly," Jack finally said, his voice hoarse, I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Molly's voice was flat. "You sold me, Pa, like I was livestock." "I know," Jack's face crumpled. "I know, and God help me, I was so deep in the bottle I couldn't see straight. I thought I was doing right by you. Calhoun said he'd give you a good home, said you'd want for nothing." "He's 50 years old," Molly's composure shattered. "He's older than you, and you know what he wanted from me, Pa, you know, asterisk." Jack flinched like she'd struck him. "I was drunk and desperate and stupid, but I'm sober now, been sober for 6 days." He held up his trembling hands as proof. "And I want to make this right. I want to tear up that contract and tell Calhoun to go to hell." "Can you?" Sam interjected. "Legally, can you void the contract?" Jack shook his head miserably. "I owe Calhoun near $300. I got no way to pay that back. If I void the contract, he'll take me to court, probably have me thrown in jail for fraud. And Molly, she'll still be my daughter, still my responsibility, and I got nothing to give her. No house, no money, no future." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of Mrs. Talbot's mantel clock. Sam's mind raced, turning over possibilities, discarding them one by one. Then an idea surfaced, crazy, impulsive, probably the worst decision he'd ever make. But it was a decision that might actually work. "What if someone else paid your debt?" Sam said slowly. Jack looked up, confused. "Who'd do that?" "Me, I got some savings. Not much, but maybe enough to settle things with Calhoun if we negotiate." Molly gasped. "You can't." "Hear me out." Sam turned to her, his expression serious. "I pay off your pa's debt. That voids the contract with Calhoun. Then," he took a breath, aware that what he was about to suggest would change everything. "Then you come work for me. As my ward, I'll sponsor your schooling, make sure you got a roof over your head, food on the table. In return, you help out around the ranch when you're not studying. Fair wages, no strings attached. When you turn 18, you're free to go your own way." It was the best solution he could think of. It kept Molly safe, gave her a chance at the education she wanted, and didn't tie her to marriage or servitude. It would also drain Sam's savings down to nothing and probably earn him the enmity of half the town, but those seemed like acceptable costs. Molly stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's right," Sam said simply, "and because you deserve better than what you've been given." Jack looked between them, something like hope flickering in his ravaged face. "You'd really do that for a girl you barely know?" "I would," Sam met his eyes. "But you got to stay sober. You got to prove to your daughter that you can be the man she needs you to be. Can you do that?" Jack's throat worked, then he nodded once sharply. "I can, I will." It took 3 more days to arrange everything. Patterson drew up new papers, carefully worded to make Sam Molly's legal guardian until she reached majority. Sam met with Calhoun at the saloon, the lawyer present as witness, and offered $200 cash to settle Jack Brennan's debt and void the marriage contract. Calhoun had raged, threatened, even reached for his gun before Sheriff Dodds intervened. But in the end, money talked louder than wounded pride. He took the cash, tore up the contract, and left Salvation Creek that very night, headed for richer pickings elsewhere. When it was done, Sam had exactly $14 left to his name. The ranch where Sam worked was called the Double Bar T, owned by a gruff but fair man named Thomas Wheeler. When Sam explained the situation, carefully, aware that bringing a 13-year-old girl to an all-male bunkhouse was asking for trouble, Wheeler had scratched his beard and considered. "I got a foreman's cabin sitting empty," he said finally. "Ain't much, but it's got 2 rooms and a stove. You take that, watch over the girl proper-like, and keep doing your job. We'll call it square. I'll dock your pay $20 a month for the lodging." Sam could have kissed the old man. Instead, he shook his hand and thanked him so profusely that Wheeler told him to shut up and get back to work. The cabin was small, dusty, and perfect. Sam took the smaller room, giving Molly the larger one with the window that looked out over the prairie. They scrubbed the place top to bottom, hung curtains Mrs. Talbot donated, and arranged the few pieces of furniture into something resembling a home. Molly started school in Salvation Creek that fall. She rode into town each morning with Sam, who'd drop her at the schoolhouse before heading to the ranch. She was older than the other students in her grade, but she didn't care. She soaked up knowledge like parched earth soaks up rain. In the evenings, they'd sit on the cabin's narrow porch and Molly would tell Sam about what she'd learned: history, arithmetic, geography. Her eyes would light up when she talked about books, about the worlds they contained, about the possibility that someday she might open those worlds for other children. Sam would listen, occasionally commenting, mostly just enjoying the sound of her voice. It was strange, this new life. He'd gone from a solitary man with no ties to anyone to someone responsible for another person's well-being. It should have felt like a burden. Instead, it felt like purpose. Jack Brennan came by once a week, sober and doing odd jobs around town to earn his keep. The relationship between father and daughter was fragile, full of careful words and unspoken hurt. But Molly let him visit, and that seemed like a start. Winter came. Snow blanketed the prairie, turning the world into something clean and new. Sam taught Molly how to ride a horse properly, how to mend fences, how to read the weather in the clouds. She taught him about constellations, about Greek myths, about the way words could be arranged to make beauty. Spring arrived with wildflowers and rain. Molly turned 14, and Sam bought her a set of books, actual books, not borrowed ones from a catalogue. Her joy was worth every penny he'd saved up. One evening in late May, they sat on the porch as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. Molly had finished her school year at the top of her class. The teacher had written Sam a letter saying Molly had a gift, that with proper education she could go to a teaching college, maybe even university someday. "I never thanked you properly," Molly said suddenly, "for everything you did, everything you gave up." Sam shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks." "Yes, I do." She turned to face him, her expression serious in the fading light. "You saved my life, Sam. Maybe not literally, but you saved who I am, who I'm going to be." Her voice wavered. "I was so scared that day. I thought I'd disappear into that house with Mr. Calhoun and nobody would even remember my name." "I'd have remembered," Sam said quietly. "I know," Molly smiled, and it transformed her whole face. "That's why I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to become the best teacher in the whole territory. I'm going to help kids like me who need someone to believe in them. and I'm going to tell them all about the rancher who stood up in the middle of Main Street and changed everything." Sam felt his throat tighten. "You're already making me proud." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out. The wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. Sam thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago alone, drifting, carrying guilt like a stone in his chest. He thought about the choice he'd made, the risk he'd taken, the life he'd chosen to change. It hadn't been easy. It would probably never be easy. But looking at the girl beside him, not a girl anymore really, but a young woman with fire in her eyes and dreams bigger than the horizon, Sam knew he'd make the same choice 100 times over. Sometimes the right thing wasn't the smart thing. Sometimes it wasn't even the safe thing. But it was always worth doing. "Come on," Sam said, standing and stretching. "Let's get some supper going. You got studying to do, and I got to mend that fence line tomorrow." Molly laughed and followed him inside, and the cabin filled with warmth and light, and the sound of two people who'd found family in the unlikeliest of places. Behind them, the prairie stretched endless under the stars, wild and free and full of promise.